I'm Michelle Leigh, I'm a painter. I make paintings with oil paint, I use watercolour, I use ink, I make handmade prints such as etchings and woodcuts, and I love to draw a lot as well. I use oil paint as the main material in my paintings because I love the fact that it's a very living material. You can use it, you can manipulate it, it sort of changes and grows with you. And I love that if you do make a mark, you can take that off quite easily, and sometimes the history of the marks that you make are part of the finished piece, and that's a great thing as well. Over the years I've learned to use gloves when I'm working, just to make things a little bit easier. Yeah, but I'll never not like the smell of oil paint and the longevity of it as well. I use paint as a language to express an experience, so I'm very much interested in the way that one can use the paint to tell stories, to create a narrative, and I want a painting to be something other than a photograph, to do something that a photograph can't do. I'm very much inspired by places around, overlooked places, those in-between moments, the epic in the everyday, those ordinary moments that actually are not ordinary. And my work involves myth and memory and everyday experience, and weaving those together through the language of paint and contemporary imagery. So this exhibition at Warrington, I was massively drawn to this fantastic collection, beautiful building. I think it's a hidden gem. And I love going into galleries where I'm discovering pieces, discovering things I hadn't known. So that was the first point of call, which is why I was interested in having a show at Warrington. And what I realised when I was going around the exhibition as a visitor was this sort of like amazing, almost like cacophony of objects placed together in a very strange way. You know, there would be an amazing dress, Ozzy Clark, and then next to that there was a gibbet, you know, a hanging gibbet, or a dead squirrel. And there seemed to be, on one hand, no rhyme and reason why things were placed together in the way that they were, but fascinating. And what I found was that I was like drawn into this narrative and this story. And I was thinking of a way that I could work which related to this exhibition. So I was very, very interested in having certain objects in the collection that I was fascinated by somehow reimagined into my artwork. Not as a complete new subject or new body of work, but really to push things that I've been involved in and working with more recently, and pushing them in ways that I might not have done otherwise. And I also felt it was very much an opportunity to go somewhere new with this. There was like a lovely story of the musician Keith Jarrett, who had come to play a concert. The piano was not working, and he travelled miles and miles, and he was like, oh, I can't do this. And the promoter was like, well, please just give it a go. She said, it's an opportunity. And he was like, an opportunity for what? And she said, it's an opportunity to go somewhere new. And he was able to work with it and create one of the best things ever. So I think sometimes those challenges are hugely important. And also I feel really strongly that, you know, what makes a museum visit worthwhile is not the length of time that you're there, but it's sort of like whether you move to think and to return again, you know, from however short a time we're there, because, you know, we don't all have aeons of time. So those moments, I think, are really important. And I feel also with the exhibition, it's a chance to explore, and I want the public to explore with me, and through the work come and explore and discover this exhibition, discover the objects reimagined in new ways and come somewhere new with me. I'm really interested in sort of like linking myths, particularly the Greek myths, to situations in our lives today, you know, and whether or not I can do that through the objects. Night flowers in the underworld was as inspired by the flowers and the birds as much as it was also inspired by the myth of Persephone, who's in the Greek goddess, spends half of her time in the underworld, not able to come back for the summer. And that sense of loss and that sense of hope and the sense that spring is never that far away, it's sometimes just at the edge. And that's certainly in that first piece. And I was able to be really quite playful with this because I wasn't sure whether this would be in the exhibition. I don't think I've ever put a flying fish in my work before, and I think we can all get very serious as professional artists, and that sense of playfulness that can breathe new life into work has been really exciting. So once I had chosen an object, I did several sketches. I came over to the gallery, did lots of very small drawings, took photographs, did drawings on site, came back to the studio, redid those drawings, and was trying to find ways to come into those objects in a way that I could use them, into the work. The fish, the birds, the snake skeletons, the fossils, the beautiful piece of Egyptian bark that had been used on the side of the coffin, the dresses that were absolutely fascinating. I looked at the recreation, like the diorama of the kitchen from the 50s, and was fascinated because in my kitchen that I have at home, I've got certain features of that, and I thought, can I use that? But the drawings were a way of sifting out what I couldn't use, and a way that I could find a way to use those that I could, almost like a conversation. I always think drawing and sketching is like having a kind of private conversation where you get to know somebody a little bit more, and they lead to kind of bigger conversations, which are the larger pieces for me. And it's always been a very necessary way. The drawings are not always on fancy paper or on sketches. They're sometimes on the back of an envelope, and then they get transferred to paper, or it might be this, a newspaper that I just sort of have at the time. But it's important for me to have that sense of making a mark that relates, that draws me in, and that's always for me the first port of call. And then I started working quite small, just to put marks down, and then moved over to some larger works. And the first piece I did, which was the night flowers in the underworld, went through various transformations and took a much longer time than the other pieces, because I was working in a different way. It was pushing narrative, but taking it further, this as a wonderful opportunity to be more inventive and more playful with imagery and ideas that I'd been working with. But I was now able to almost push into different ways and being more bold as well. That was really important. And I'd say I've been fascinated by the Greek myths for quite some time, and how they can be reimagined and made relevant to the world around us today, and the situations that we find ourselves in. So I have the three graces sort of texting. I have the Karen, maybe the fairy woman rather than the fairy man. And for this piece I was very much concerned of being really respectful to the objects and not just wanting to stick the objects in paintings so people could oh, there's the bird, there's this, but to really find a place for them within the context and be respectful to the culture from which they come from as well. and loving working on a large scale. Working on a large scale as a painter is not always practical, in terms of selling work or space to storage. But what I've really enjoyed is actually working large and envisioning them in the space, in the gallery, and loving that freedom that working large gives you, whereas something is as big as yourself. And also trying to find a balance between something that's large but something that's still intimate as well. That can sometimes, not be so easy. So sketches or doodles, they're always that way in to almost familiarise yourself and create that kind of personal link between you and the work. And hopefully when you have a look at the work, hopefully you'll find that too and find those narratives within that. So the title of this exhibition, 6 Objects in Search of an Artist, was very much inspired by the play 6 Characters in Search of an Author, an Absurdist play from the 1920s by Luigi Pirandello. And it was very much about characters looking for an author to bring them to life. And I just suddenly thought, a bit like finding the objects almost looking for the artist to give them a new life, a new context to be seen in, which I felt was my role within the terms of this exhibition. So that was what fascinated me, and then I wanted to try and find a link, whether or not I could use that, and it seemed to be the driving force behind it. And I'm also really fascinated by how objects have often inspired artists and writers throughout history. Bruce Chatwin, who was completely fascinated by a cabinet of curiosities in his grandmother's house, so much so that he went off to travel, and to write. And Picasso and Braque, who, were fascinated by looking at objects, masks, African masks, other wonderful artefacts that actually, you might say, were the pre-runners for Cubism. So there is so much often that in the busy world, I think, that we live in, that we don't always get a chance just to look, because everything moves us on so much more. And I think to be able to pause and to look is a great thing, in the world that we live in. And I always feel that myself, I kind of almost like my generation sort of spans those different ways where when I was a student there was no such thing as email and no internet, to today where I can take a photograph now on my mobile phone and I can send that really, really quickly. So it's a very, very different way of communication, and we also speed it up. And it's sometimes quite hard to keep pace with that. And I think that the act of looking, particularly in museums, is a great thing, because it teaches us just to stop for a moment, that not everything is about racing forward, and sometimes just being still is a great thing to do. And so that's also something that attracts me to museums, and particularly a museum like Warrington, that I feel is almost like this hidden gem, and you come in from a bright day and things are dark, purposely so, to protect them, but it can take a while sometimes just to really look. And wonderful David Hockney, who's just died recently, always said that if we just learn to look, that really is one of the most important things, because a lot of the times we see and we go through life, but actually really looking just takes a little bit more time. And I really hope that when people come and have a look at this exhibition, they feel that they can take the time to look and to see, and to look at my work and then go and look at the objects that inspired that work as well.